Hi, Josh here, and you're watching 610 Bob's Builds, where I turn chunks of metal into things, usually. In this video, I will be making a bulletproof Hydro Assist mount. Literally, I think this thing could stop a bullet. For starters, a Hydro Assist is a hydraulic ram that assists steering. It is usually installed in an off-road capable vehicle. One side of the hydraulic ram mounts to the axle, while the other side mounts to the tie rod. The few kits that I have seen utilize a clamp to attach the hydraulic ram to the tie rod and axle tube, relying purely on friction to not move. If you have seen any of my builds, I surely hope I don't have to tell you that I will not be using this method. So here is the axle side mount. Let's see how it's made. I start out with 2-inch rod. I throw the rod into my lathe, which appears to be on the surface of the sun. What happened? I turn the end of the rod down to 1 inch. This is for my boots to sit on. I then turn down the end to 3/4 of an inch for the hydraulic ram to sit on. I return to earth, thankfully, and turn the threads. I believe the threads are 3/4 inch fine thread. I throw the freshly turned mount into my mill and flatten the ends. This will allow me to insert the mount into my leaf spring perch. It took me a couple of tries to get just enough shaved off. I then weld the mount to the leaf spring perch. Sorry, no video. To keep the hydraulic ram in place and to support the other boot, I made my own nut. After turning the one end down to 1 inch for the other boot, I bore out the nut. Then I finished boring the nut with yes and end mill. I didn't have the appropriately sized drill bit. I make sure to bore out the end a little bit to 3/4 of an inch. This way, I know that I can slide over the non-threaded part of the mount and compress the swivel eye in the ram. This is actually a good place to use an end mill. It gives a square shoulder. I will later tap the nut by hand. It's a bit easier than threading such a small inside thread on a lathe. I also cut 2 flat spots so that a wrench can be used to tighten it. Now, the mount for the tie rod side, which is a clamp. But the clamp will sit into a groove, so it won't be relying on friction because it has a hard edge to push against. I made this clamp the exact same way as the tie rod end clamps, but if you haven't seen that video, here's how I made it. I first turned the rod down to 3.5 inches. I then bore out the rod. I make the hole a bit smaller than the tie rod end clamps. This will give the hydraulic ram more surface area to push against. I then mill out pockets for the bolts, drill for the bolts, and then cut the clamp in half. First using a high-speed cutter, then a Sawzall. Yeah, I haven't found a better way yet. After tapping, I mill 2 grooves into the bottom, which is now the top of the clamp. I then weld plates into these grooves. This will hold the pin that holds the ram. Back to the mill, I drill a 1-inch hole through the plates for the pin to go through. I then turn the pin. This is pretty much the same as the axle side mount. 1 inch for the boot, 3/4 inch for the ram and threads. The nut is also pretty much the same as the first one. It is a little longer to take the steel plate into account, and I added a taper to the end so that it won't jam going through the hole during installation. I finish up by turning a groove into the tie rod. And the ram is mounted. Be sure to hit that like button. Come on, where are you going to see overbuilding like this?
Here's a new game, Throw the Rim. You heard of kicking a can down the road? Well, I kick a rim up the driveway.